Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us for the very first meeting of the Coalition of Sustainable Perfumery, also known as the COSP. So this is a pretty informal group. We are gathering together because we are four indie perfumers, all from different backgrounds, and we are interested in just learning more about sustainability in our industry. For all of us have come across problems when it comes to sustainable sourcing and transparency. And so the point of this group is basically to just ask questions, get answers, and provide resources. So to start off, I'll introduce myself. I'm Heather Deangelo. I'm the founder of a company called Carta Fragrances. My company is about 2 years old, and it started with sustainability being one of my very core values, and I weave sustainability from every part, from sourcing to packaging. So yeah.
Yeah. I am Molly Brennan, and I'm the founder of Sacred Scents. My company is about 1 year old and based out of San Francisco. And I actually came to this from nonprofit, so I was immediately interested in social and environmental impact, and I was really interested in figuring out how I could set up my company to actually be as environmentally sustainable as possible, and realized there were some challenges in that. So here I am.
My name is Mauricio Garcia. I am the founder of Herbcraft Perfumery and a founding team member of Ministry of Scent. My fragrance journey began because I love fragrance and plant materials, and my obsession with plant materials became deep research into sourcing and their production and their growth. And so I was very excited to meet with a group of like-minded perfumers that are interested in finding solutions to the problems around sustainability that we have in the industry and tapping into our private or individual resources together in a way that we can make available to the broader community. I work with the Ministry of Scent and Untitled Perfumery, have revealed how broad our community really is, and so I'm excited to compile these resources for everyone to use and to not reinvent the wheel every time you're trying to create a sustainable business or at least have sustainable practices.
Hi, I'm Sydney Buffman. I'm a perfumer. My company is called Botanica. Before I was a perfumer, I studied as a clinical herbalist for many years. I'm also a graphic designer. I'm currently living in Boulder, Colorado, but I plan to move to LA in the fall. And I'm currently working as design director at Centrunk. And so excited to meet up with these guys. I also would really love to work on materials for the community for education. And so before we started today, I wanted to kind of define what sustainability was, right? What is it? It's a huge topic. And my view of sustainability ended up being a lot more human-centric than I would have initially thought. Coming from an herbalist background, I think about my relationship with the plants all the time. I think about saving these precious resources and lands, and I think for sustainability to be effective, we need to weave in social impact as well. And so I think here's how I define it. Sustainability is a long-term investment in our future as a human species. Operating sustainably means meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs too. Asking how we can ensure we are not robbing future generations of the resources we enjoy today, and asking how we can reduce harm in the present and protect our most vulnerable workers. In business, this means making decisions in terms of environmental, social, and human impact for the long term, rather than on short-term gains.
That's so good.
That's amazing.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, Sydney, what does that definition mean to you, or how does sustainability impact your business?
So my business is brand new. I'm in the process of sourcing everything and thinking about how my projects can scale up and how can I do that responsibly. For me, that means working as a mixed media perfumer. Packaging is, I'm still looking into it, but I would prefer to use the least amount of plastic possible, and use materials that could potentially be reused or biodegradable.
Similarly, the packaging journey is, I think, one that we've all found ourselves even stuck at in terms of finding sustainable packaging. One thing that I have had the, I suppose, the honor of experiencing and growing an understanding of is how creative we can be as perfumers. And for me and for Herbcraft, the conservation of precious botanical species is the reason that Herbcraft exists, and it's why I do what I do. And so for me, the consumption of endangered species in the fragrance industry is something that is very concerning to me for their own sake. I think that Sydney has an amazing human-centric definition of sustainability that is going to be at the heart of the COSP. But for me, I think that there is a lot of opportunity to develop and refine our artistic capabilities and technical capabilities as perfumers. We have the opportunity to create sustainable alternatives utilizing both natural and man-made materials for Mizor sandalwood, for oud, for Atlas cedar, for frankincense, for vanilla, for these really endangered species that are at the brink of extinction because of the human species. And so how do we take our ingenuity, our love of scent, our love of these materials, and figure out a way to preserve these species, either by creating alternatives to them or figuring out how to harvest or grow them sustainably.
I love that. That's a reason that I'm a mixed media perfumer as well. My personal journey into this is that my background is in tropical ecology, and I was working doing research in the Malaysian rainforest, and I was looking at the impact of oil palm plantation, which is this large scale monoculture plantations. I was looking at the effect that these like large monocultures have on soil microbes, so fungi and bacteria that live in the soil. And specifically, I was looking at so in Malaysian rainforest, there's this one tree that dominates the rainforest. They're dipterocarp trees, and there they are, these really the big ones like that you think like rainforest trees, like you can't wrap your arms around it, it's just so big. And those trees form associations, symbiotic associations with a fungi called ectomycorrhizal fungi. And what my advisor and I found when we were doing this research is that these large-scale plantations actually destroy the microbes in the soil. And so we don't know how you're going to grow back these trees in the future, because if you don't have the fungi in the soil that the big trees need to have this association with, then how are we ever going to grow these these plants back? So that was kind of like how I got into thinking about large-scale agriculture. And yet when I started as a perfumer, despite having this like background in sustainability, I definitely had like a kid in a candy store mentality. When I first started buying things, I was just like buying essential oils like willy-nilly, like not think I have Mysore sandalwood, which is terrible. But I wasn't thinking about it. And then it's like there was this disconnect. And then I started researching how essential oils are actually made, and it was like, duh, these are plants, and they require massive amounts of land sometimes to grow, and a ton of resources to grow these plants, and often in monocultures. And that was when it really hit home for me that I was possibly contributing through my consumerism to an industry that like I had just spent like 7 years like researching and like been rallying against. So that was when I started looking into this idea of sustainable sourcing for essential oils, and like really looking into, as Mauricio was saying, and Sydney as well so far, like what is the more sustainable option? Like sometimes it's synthetics and sometimes it's essential oils. And really like it's so hard to untangle right now because there's so little transparency about what the better choice is. I mean, and so without being an actual like sustainability expert or sustainability life cycle expert, what can we do as indie perfumers to begin kind of untangling these issues?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Heather. So, oh my gosh, that's a lot to follow. I'm going to jump back to the packaging and how that actually started to pull me into this, and made me more interested in reaching out. Like, I was very connected to my interest in plants and my love of plants and my interest in environmentalism, which is actually where like my entire career started. And as I kind of flowed into more of the social aspect, it was sustainable international development, and you deal with agriculture on a very small scale in a lot of senses, and how it's in, like, how is it interacting with the communities, how is it impacting the communities when big agriculture comes in, how does it impact like the people, education, health. Like, I had this very different perspective. And when I stepped back from that and like kind of moved towards perfumery, I had no idea that it was going to wrap back around and I would be looking essentially at the exact same thing. Because I did, as I was like, oh, I want to have a socially responsible business. I did a lot with benefit corporations, B Corp, and like that certification. What does that mean? How do you assess your company? What does that look like? So I was like, oh, well, if I have a company, I definitely want it to follow all of these guidelines. So I just started out with a checklist and was like, packaging, let's start with packaging. That's what brought me back to it. And I was like, and my thing was like, this is where I'm going to lead into the larger conversation about collaboration, is that I started reaching out to different companies because I would like find packaging I liked that said it was sustainable. And I would try and contact those people. And I think one person got back to me. Like, there isn't necessarily a culture of collaboration. There isn't in most industries, but in this case, this is what I encountered. Having come out of nonprofit, there's a lot of collaboration like all the time. So I kind of stepped into it being like, we should all be in this together, guys. Which luckily we're like creating this group so we can really foster these conversations, build these connections, expand it out to like the broader industry, be able to have this conversation with people who are like more immersed or at a higher level in the industry. So in relation to all of that, I'm very interested in hearing what all of you have to say, in terms of like, what direction do you see this organization going in? What kind of conversations do you want to have?
Oh, that's a good question. Who wants to go first?
Well, I guess I can talk about some of the things that we have planned. One of them being an additional series that follows this first episode, I suppose, is what we're in right now. A series of episodes that include us, the founders, as a panel, speaking to different experts from all over the industry. We have been fortunate enough to become friends with, or at least know professionally, people from the fragrance house world, from the supply industry world. Heather can speak to her resources from her science background and her educational background. Molly and Sydney similarly have some pretty amazing contacts. And so we are going to be bringing them in a series of different episodes that will also include brands that we really admire that are working sustainably or have a sustainability focused business model or a way of designing fragrances, and also retailers and what they're doing on their end to encourage sustainability from the brands that they stock and they sell, as well as compiling resources that include alternatives to endangered species, as I mentioned. And that is everything from accords that we're working on designing for you guys to individual molecules and describing them so that you're able to kind of sift through them and see which ones might be acceptable olfactory alternatives to some of these species that you're using in your fragrances.
I think that resources list is one of the things I'm most excited about, because, I think that's going to be one of the hardest things to untangle. Like, for instance, like vanillin from, what's it called? Like petroleum, like byproducts versus versus vanillin, which is, by the way, for those watching, it's an isolate. Vanillin from vanilla beans versus vanillin extracted from lignin, which is a byproduct of the paper industry. Which vanillin is the most sustainable? Like, how do you begin looking at these kind of like life cycles for all these different processes. And I wish we had the answers for that. And I haven't found this. I mean, all the Googling in the world doesn't seem to be like yielding these answers. So I'm really excited about like bringing on experts to ask them these questions. Like hopefully someone will help us get to the bottom of it. Or just, I don't know, doing the hard work ourselves of trying to figure it out so we can provide these kind of resources to people, doing the legwork to help people, downstream.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm really excited about talking to people who know a lot more than I do about these various complicated topics, and I'm really looking forward to making those complicated issues a little bit more transparent for our community, and creating resources, like doing that legwork and research that I know that I would want as a resource.
Yeah, one of the things that I was so interested in terms of starting this was making it possible for anybody who wants to become an indie perfumer to have access to the materials, to the resources in order to be a sustainable like organization, company, however they want to define it. Because having entered into that, I was like, there is a barrier to entry to actually being sustainable. And in some cases, sustainability is used as like a selling point, but it's that people don't share their information necessarily. Like they don't share their sources. There's kind of like a closed door on that. So rather than sharing like, please, I want everybody to purchase sustainably, here's where I can do this. Yeah, the opposite is kind of true. It's kind of hard to like get in there. And you're like, I just want to behave well. I want to be the most responsible that I can be. Some of the larger conversations that I'm curious about having have to do with the values that the companies are talking about, like a lot of the larger companies, and that transparency. And I understand like these issues are really complex. Like they can't just give away a lot of information. Having come out of nonprofit where because you are accountable to the public because you don't pay taxes, so essentially you are like receiving people's tax dollars. You have to report on everything. You have to be transparent about everything, every single cent you spend, where it comes from. So I like have a perspective where like, sure, why would you not tell me that? Like but you don't know if people are being responsible if you can't see behind the curtain.
Yeah.
So in an industry where it is so important that you protect your information, how do you actually make it sustainable? Like, is there a way to have a third-party assessor? So kind of like finding a way to do that on a broader industry scale and making that information accessible to the public. That's an even bigger part of this, is because like I started playing with essential oils. Like that was kind of my gateway. I was like, ooh,
I think that's how we all started.
Yeah, I mean, you get to make potions, you mix everything together. It smells, most of the time it smells good, not always.
True.
There are some mistakes that happen.
So many mistakes.
Yeah. But anyway, it was like kind of continuing along that path and actually like, so where are all these things coming from? And a lot of it is like people lack information. They don't want to kill sandalwood. They just have no idea that it's going extinct. Yeah. Like if you provide information and you provide alternatives, then people start to be able to make these very aware like consumer choices because they are like voting with their dollars essentially. Like your consumer behavior is actually extremely powerful depending on who you're buying from. And we want to create a culture where you have the capacity to make that sustainable choice.
It is really extremely powerful. I don't think people realize how much buying power they have. I mean, the interest in sustainability has shifted the industry over the last 10 years dramatically. I mean, that's no small feat, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the more we can stay informed, the more impact we can have.
Yeah. These fragrance houses have some of the most sophisticated sustainability initiatives in the industry, but as Molly said, there's not necessarily a ton of transparency, or if the transparency exists, consumers and independent makers don't necessarily know how to find, these reports, let alone access the resources that these big fragrance houses have in terms of their ability to control supply chain, or at least assess their supply chains and then make decisions accordingly. And as you said, like one big digital guilt trip is not super useful. How do we, how do the four of us, or as a community that, as our COSP community grows, which I hope it does, I look forward to it doing so. How do we figure out how to, make everything accessible, or how do we at least compile the resources that we're able, work with our friends in the industry that we do have in terms of distribution of materials, procurement of materials, and make it easier to be sustainable. Like,
Yeah. Like facilitating group buys, I could see that. You know, we all have farms we like to work with, our distributors that we trust, but they have still a pretty high barrier to entry. I mean, I still don't have a large enough order for Biolands, so I'm just like waiting to get that money. But if I went in with some other perfumers, I'd be able to make that purchase.
I'm here for you, Heather.
Thanks. Anybody wants
their tuberose is amazing.
Their tuberose is amazing. Yeah, but maybe that's something that we could set up on our website. Not that we want to be an essential oil distribution company, but even just, you know, maybe working with other distributors that we know to kind of facilitate those group buys could be something we could provide. I think another thing, and it does have to tie into like defining what sustainability is, but I think, like, what is the bar for being able to call yourself a sustainable brand? You know, and I was defining that myself as like asking questions all the time of how you can, you know, the question is this as sustainable as I can do this right now with my resources? Like, am I doing everything? Is there a better way? You know, and just like asking that question constantly of yourself. But like, aside from just doing the very best that you can with the resources that you have on hand, with the information that you have on hand, is there some kind of like bar for sustainability so that so we don't, because I mean, I have heard that there's greenwashing in the clean beauty industry, where, you know, people say that they have non-toxic, I hate that word toxic, but non-toxic fragrances. And they do, I mean, they have chemical, well, everything is chemicals, but, you know, you know, you guys know that's a whole other conversation I could go into, but it's like, you know, there's greenwashing there, and there's a worry that there could be a similar kind of greenwashing with sustainability, where someone could just be like, oh, well, you know, I just do this one thing, and so I'm a sustainable brand, you know, and I don't know if that's something that we want to even tackle here. That not like we could give out like certificates of sustainability.
No. I
like,
think we absolutely should tackle it. Like, maybe we can collaborate with someone else who already has a certification, like in terms of promoting it, or like just working with them on like what it is that it entails. Like, I think that's an important discussion, or if we can find like multiple groups that do that, to bring them together and look at what the different certifications are and like have a conversation around that. I think that could be really cool.
I mean, I wonder if we can put together a sustainability audit guideline for indie perfumers.
Oh, yeah.
Small businesses or medium-sized businesses.
Yeah, I actually, one of the things, we were looking at like some of the reports that you guys posted, and they actually included stuff about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. They were actually incorporating it, and I think it would be actually really interesting to look into like what those indicators are, and kind of integrate those indicators into like a potential assessment for an indie perfumer. I'm also curious about, like, I have to look at B Corp again and look at like how they do the assessments, but to actually make it industry specific, I think would be really valuable, because when I first looked at it, like, this is how I got all into like digging into the different materials that I had, because I was like, oh, here's where I can buy like clary sage, and I was like, where does it come from? What's happening to the workers? What's the environmental impact of the farming? And like, none of that information was there. And I was like, I can't say I'm sustainable. I have no idea. Like, I can't make that claim. I can say like, you can recycle the bottles, or I have packaging that's compostable. Some of it's compostable. Like, I still use roller balls. Those are inherently unsustainable. They have plastic. Like, there are certain, I feel like I'm making a lot of compromises, and I feel like I don't have options right now. Like, I can be as sustainable as possible. I can use like organic oils. I can do, but then there's also a conversation around that. I saw Heather's eyes. Yeah. Which we'll also have. That's coming as well. There's just a lot to talk about, like on all different levels of like, from like creation, like growing, sourcing, everything. Like,
I think that we do have the opportunity to, like I said, just create these tools for people to utilize or for people to access. You're a very talented designer, Sydney, so we can create like infographics that people can, download and keep on their computer or go on our website. They can bookmark our website whenever they have a question. Not to say that we'll be able to answer everything, but to kind of tie both of these things together with what you'd said earlier, Heather, about brands greenwashing their image with, sustainability. I only know of 2 other brands that so far have stated that they're not going to utilize botanical species that are listed on the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's Red List. And I work for one of them. So it's like, how many brands are doing that homework, that necessary homework? And one of them is a very widely distributed brand. And that's amazing. Like, that's really cool that they're doing that at the level of distribution that they have. And now you guys have that list, which is amazing. And I'm sure you're going to be taking that into consideration for your own production and your own fragrance development and design. But, I would like to create a downloadable PDF of all of the fragrance materials that are on the red list for all of you to use. Hopefully that'll be on the website by the time this is up, actually.
It absolutely will, I'm sure. But also, this comes back to the synthetics versus naturals, because I think I'm the only person on here right now who still works entirely in naturals, which I know, but I love that there's a conversation here. Like, I'm not an inflammatory natural perfumer. Like, I want to have this conversation. I think it's really important, and I'm totally flexible. Like, based on new information, I will change my behavior. We have discussed how I need to stop using frankincense. And I'm getting there.
and I do think that there's a way to be a natural perfumer in a sustainable way. Like, I mean, and I say that, and I feel like that could be inflammatory to even state, because maybe I'm wrong, but I hope that there's a way to be a natural perfumer still in a way that is sustainable. Because I know that there's a lot of reasons that people choose to use all natural perfumes for, and I respect that. I know for you, it's very ritual based as well. So there's like, I don't know, these are all conversations that we're going to have and issues we're going to tackle.
And just, so that people know we are aware that this is a very great conversation. It's not black and white, because what are a lot of the alternatives to natural materials? Petrochemical derivatives. So, this is not, everything's gray. And we're hoping to, or we are planning on having people from the entire spectrum of the industry, from chemists that make a lot of these fragrance chemicals, or not a lot of them, but make them, to people that source the natural materials, to people that grow them. So we're going to have a lot of people on here talking about all these different things that we nerd out about and talk to each other constantly about. Now you get to listen to us do it. So
and potentially join in.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in terms of like kind of more of a long range thing, we are actually really interested in creating this as like kind of a webinar where if we have a speaker come, the viewers are then able to actually propose questions and interact with that speaker. And we're also going to be posting the videos in a few different places. We're going to be posting it as a podcast. I'm going to let Heather tell you the socials for us. I know we're going to put it up on Facebook. We're going to do YouTube. We're working out of Instagram. And I'm going to pass it to Heather for that information.
Okay, super not prepared with the handles over here, but we are on Instagram. And on Instagram, we are, I think it's just, we are just at Sustainable Perfumery, which is the same kind of as our website. We are sustainableperfumery.org. That's our website. On Instagram, we are at Sustainable Perfumery. And I really hope that I had the wherewithal when I was setting up the Facebook accounts to also make it just Sustainable Perfumery. And I think I did. And does anybody have access to our Facebook page?
I have it as, the group is Coalition. Like when I search it, it's Coalition.
Yeah. Okay.
Of Sustainable Perfumery. Yeah, but it comes up.
It's on our website too, if you're confused.
Yes.
Perfect.
On our website, you'll find all of our social links there.
Thank you, Sydney. So sustainableperfumery.org, that's where you need to go. And yeah, please, if you have any questions that you want to email us or any feedback, we're just info@sustainableperfumery.org. One more time, it's info@sustainableperfumery.org. So yeah, send us any questions or suggestions. And I guess that wraps it up, right, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us for our very first meeting of the COSP. And yeah, I hope that you kind of got a sense of what this group is about and took away some of the kind of things that, you know, about us and who we are as perfumers and things that are important to us. And we hope they're important to you too, and that you will join us on our next video. So thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.